Hi, my name is Steve Chindgren. I'm here at the Archives of Falconry in Boise, Idaho. In front of me we have a facsimile of the original version in Latin of The Art of Falconry by King Frederick II. What an amazing piece of literature. My very first falconry book was Art of Falconry. Of course, it was translated. This was back in the late 50s, and I learned of falconry from an Encyclopedia Britannica. And I talked my mom into taking me to libraries to try and find a book on falconry. We went to every library in town. There were no falconry books. We went to every bookstore in town. And finally, on a small bookstore on Main Street in Salt Lake City called Sam Weller's, I found King Frederick's The Art of Falconry. It's it looked like a Bible. And I pulled it down and looked at it, and, oh, Mom, I want this so bad, you know. $20 it was, and I thought, well, she looked at me and she goes, we'll have to come back another time. So I went home and I was really sad, you know, I couldn't get the book, but I went to my grandmother's orchard and began to pick apricots and fill lugs and sacks and took them in my little red flyer wagon around the neighborhood, selling them to the neighbors. And it worked out pretty well because when I'd make a sale, they'd always ask me, what are you doing with your money? I go, I'm saving it to buy a book. And they'd say, well, we'll take a whole lug. So it didn't take me long to raise my $20, and my mom took me back down, and I purchased my copy of King Frederick's. And it's an amazing book, although for a child of my age, it was difficult to understand. But there were plenty of pictures to look at in it, and I was fascinated with all the photographs. And I became passionate about falconry, basically tunnel vision, from the time I was about 8 years old. And I never looked back. King Frederick was such an amazing man. Let me just read a little bit. Frederick II, Emperor of the Romans, King of Jerusalem and of Sicily, is a lover of wisdom, with a philosophic and speculative mind. He wanted this work to be so well done. He waited 30 years because he thought that to take on this endeavor before he had at least 30 years of experience would not be adequate to be able to get it the way he wanted it. Not only did he wait 30 years, but he also summoned masters of the art from all 4 regions of the earth at a great expense to come and stay and to discuss different aspects of the sport and the art, to be able to weed out the good and the bad and take the most important things to put them into this book. So he really did work hard and why did he want to do such a wonderful manuscript on falconry? Why did he feel it was so important? Let me read further here. The pursuit of falconry enables nobles and rulers disturbed and worried by the cares of state to find relief in the pleasures of the chase. The poor, as well as the less noble, by following this avocation, may earn some of the necessities of life, and both classes will find in bird life attractive manifestations of the processes of nature. So it's basically just a study of nature. In fact, this book is recognized as the first ornithological treaty ever written, the first scientific volume, because he discusses birds, not only raptors, but he discusses all birds. He divides birds into land birds, sea birds, and neutral birds. Goes into great extent and detail describing their habits, what they feed on, their anatomy, everything about them. So it's a really well-written research book on birds. The book is made up of 6 separate books. Book 1 dealing with the structure and habits of birds. And as I discussed earlier, he talks about all types of birds. But funny that in chapter 1 of this book, he talks about falconry, an art more noble than other hunting forms. Why is falconry more noble than other hunting forms? You have to remember, in the day that he wrote this book, there were no firearms. But he divides it into instruments for the hunt, like bow and arrows and spears and projectiles you throw, snares and traps. He looks at that as being the least noble way of hunting. The other way they hunted back in those days was with four-legged animals, dogs, cheetahs, and he considers this to be second. But nothing is more noble than hunting a falcon. I would like to do a reading here. There are many arguments that can be advanced to demonstrate the noble character of falconry, as a discriminating reader of this book will soon discover, and he will, in his way, learn more about the secrets of nature than if he followed other kinds of venery or hunting. It is true that the latter are more popular, because their technique is crude and easier to learn. Falconry, on the other hand, is less familiar and does not commend itself to the majority because skill in it is difficult to acquire and because it is more refined. Makes you proud to be a falconer, to read his words. Book 2 is on falcons used in hunting, their furniture, care, and manning them. Most of his book deals with flying long-wing falcons. He does address goshawks and sparrowhawks a little bit in the chapters on birds, but most of his hunting was with long wings. He also was in such great detail about everything. Not only did he tell you about the different types of falcons and which falcons were most desirable, but he also had one of my favorite chapters, the qualifications of a falconer. It was through this chapter that I originated a falconry meet that I continued and put on for 15 years called the King Frederick Celebration. At the King Frederick Celebration, we did a few medieval type things, which we thought were medieval. We had archery tournaments. We played chess. But the highlight of the meet was the falconer's dash. For King Frederick said, a falconer must be of daring spirit. He must not be afraid to cross rough and broken ground. He must be able to swim rivers if he needed to assist his bird. He must be a person who's not lazy. He must wake early. He must be able to listen for the bells of the falcon. He must have a good carrying voice so that the falcon can hear it when it has flown far away. You have to remember King Frederick did not have telemetry, and telemetry is relatively new to falconry. In fact, it's been said today that the best thing that ever happened to falconry since King Frederick was radio telemetry and captive breeding. So we did this falconer's dash at this meet that I did, and we climbed trees, we rappelled, we swung lures, we tied falconry knots, we got way in the distance and shouted, and everyone had to raise their hand that they heard the falconer. We swam rivers. And so the qualifications of a falconer was something that really touched me and inspired me to never, ever fail to assist my bird when it needed it. So I thank King Frederick for that. Book 3 is on the use of the lure and training falcons to fly in a cast, and on educating gyrfalcons to fly at cranes, and on the hounds used in falconry. So he covered a lot of different things. Book 4 is on crane hawking with gyrfalcons and other falcons. Book 5 is on heron hawking with sakers and other falcons. And Book 6, hawking at the brook with the peregrine falcon. That is my favorite one. That's the one that meant the most to me because I wasn't hunting cranes or herons. I was going to try and hunt ducks. And this book talks about hunting ducks on creeks and ponds and with peregrine falcons. And he goes into great detail to describe how to pick the best peregrine, what plumages tend to be the birds, and what you should look for in the color of the feet, the shape of the head, everything that will help you to pick the best ones. And I guess he had a lot of peregrines to choose from. And so he had the 8 modes of flight of the peregrine falcon, where he described the most desirable ones to the least desirable ones, and how to correct each different behavior. So it's a very, very detailed book, and I've learned so much from it, and I continue to go back to it to read it, because every time I do, I learn something new again. But as a child, it was a difficult book for me to read, because it's really not a little kid's book. But it's amazing. And you know, the castles and hunting lodges of King Frederick, I was so inspired by them when I was a kid. I used to go out and try and, I took a kestrel that I had, and I went down, and we lived in an old house. We had a pump room in there that was all cement, and it was just dark, and I went down in there and cleaned it all out and made me a little perch on a pipe and had my kestrel in there and lit a candle. And I mean, to me, I was in a castle. And I would say that I always admired, he was so driven in not only in falconry, but in architecture as well, designing castles. And I attribute King Frederick for having me find and have my own hunting lodge, the House of Grouse in Wyoming today. And it hadn't been for lighting that fire in me, I don't think the House of Grouse would ever have existed. I have a very special gift that was given to me, and I'll read to you. It was from Patrick Morel. It says, "This is the most important and valuable piece of my collection. A varvel from the 13th century belonging to the Emperor King Frederick II. Now, a varvel was a name tag that went on the end of the jess, so that if the falcon was found by someone, they would know who it belonged to. And on King Frederick's varvel that I have at the House of Grouse, it has his coat of arms on it. And this was signed, Sincerely, Patrick Morel." So that's a very valuable piece for me to have, just because of that he would give me such a wonderful thing. I believe, there's probably not another one in North America, if in the world, that I know of. So amazing man, an amazing manuscript, and it's been a real pleasure to be here. And I want to thank the archives for inviting me to talk about this wonderful book.